Okay, we're recording. Good morning, everyone. Officially say that we are recording and that we're on. I'm going to share the screen. Show all windows. Here we go. Okay, we have the text up there. I'll start in a moment. Just do something over here and make the text a little larger there. Can everyone see the text? Yeah, is it large? It's large enough for everyone. Okay. You can make it a little bit. How's that? A little bit larger.
No, it's good, Rabbi.
Okay, Charlie.
Yes, good.
Okay, everyone's got the text there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I see Ed is going to be on in a moment. Um, we've been discussing this question of a sex offender in the synagogue, and we have as our primary text the CCAR, that's the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the international organization of Reform rabbis, and they had a question which was brought to their attention, and they wrote the response, which we started to look up. We'll look at last week of this question. Just to review the question was, again, a young man was sexually molested at synagogue day camp by a junior counselor. The perpetrator was convicted, spent a year in juvenile detention, was released. The victim's family has gotten the restraining order that prevents the perpetrator from being near the victim's home, school, and synagogue. Okay, that's the situation. And the questions we started looking at were, if the judge had not allowed the synagogue to be included in the restraining order, should we have allowed him to attend services or religious school, or and under what conditions? And two, something about the perpetrator's mother, that she was aware that the son had molested other children and had not informed the director of education, who was in charge of the camp program, who hired this person to be a camp counselor. Given this reason, given the circumstances, is there any reason to deny the mother access to the synagogue? And then that is complicated by the fact that the victim's mother, who was, as you might imagine, quite upset, cannot tolerate being in the same place as the perpetrator's mother. Okay, that was the question. We went through the answer that was given, and we note that the teshuvah, the response, began. Okay, I'm using the word teshuvah in different. It has many meanings. The word teshuvah can mean repentance. It also can mean answer to a specific question of Jewish law. This document is a teshuvah, and in this teshuvah, they discuss the issue of repentance, which is also called teshuvah. So yeah, it's a little confusing. And we discussed how Judaism does believe in teshuvah, right? We believe in repentance. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year, and the principal theme of the day is teshuvah. And so they talked about that. And then they got this question of, there's no denying the centrality of teshuvah. Is it an appropriate category? Do we apply this? Oh, the perpetrator has done teshuvah. And then we had this question of, what is it that this young man is suffering from? And I actually have I don't know if I had this last week, because I added this to the text. The American Psychological Association Dictionary of Psychology, paraphilia, any of a group of disorders, unusual behavior, sexual excitement. Now, it does include pedophilia, and then they go on and say a paraphilia is considered a paraphilia disorder only if it causes distress or impairment to the individual, which we see is the case. And we know that this even if we call it a psychological illness, is not easily solved, is not easily changed, and there is danger even in the future, unless how can we be certain that everyone is safe? So what did the committee decide? The obligation, our first duty is to ensure our synagogue and schools are places of safety. And therefore they decided it is reasonable to presume that the offender's presence would be deeply disturbing to his victim as well as to others, right? Now we're talking about everyone in the synagogue knows what happened. So if this guy is showing up, not just the victim or the victim's mother, but others would be disturbed. The congregation's leadership bears the overriding
After they put the tax on
members
on the tax.
That the synagogue is a safe place. The congregation is therefore under no Judaic religious obligation to admit this young person, a convicted and hopefully recovering sex offender, onto its grounds or into its programmatic activities. That's as far as we got last week. This, in other words, they're saying he's out, and we don't want him at this point because we are saying the overriding issue is protecting those in the community, overriding the question, well, has he done teshuvah? Maybe, but our need to protect everyone is so great that we do not want him to be in the synagogue or at its activities. Okay, we're clear so far on that, right? Okay. Any comment or a question so far? So now we're going to go into some new areas. Okay. What about the offender's mother? Remember, the offender's mother doesn't want to be anywhere near the perpetrator's mother. They both belong to the same synagogue. By the way, we also discussed, is it obligatory for the synagogue to inform other synagogues of this event in the case that the family chooses to quit that synagogue and join another, right? We had some different answers. We will see some. I have found one interesting answer to that question, which we will look at, but that's not asked here, but I think it's just as important a question, what is the obligation? Well, if we're obligated to see to it that the people at our synagogue are safe, how far does that go? It's one thing to be in, I can use the example of Nashville. Hey, there are 5 synagogues. It's really easy to let everybody know what's going on if you want to. But if you're in northern New Jersey, there are a lot of synagogues, right? So that's a good question. We'll take a look at that. And I'm going to hold that for now. What about the mother? Okay. Second part of this question, Sheila, is not hypothetical. Should the mother of the perpetrator who did not inform the congregation of her son's history of sexual abuse be denied access to the synagogue? First of all, comments, what do you think? Should the mother be denied access to the synagogue? Any comment on that? Yeah, Charlie, what do you think? You're on mute. You have to unmute yourself, okay? Charlie, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
The mother is complicit in what happened, and
Okay.
therefore she should also be denied access. She's an accomplice.
She's an accomplice. Okay, you think she should be denied access. Any other comments on that? Think Charlie's right? Think Charlie's wrong? Anyone? No? Okay. Yeah, Carol.
I agree with what Charlie is saying. She knew that he was a multiple
offender.
Habitual. You want to say habitual?
Offender, and she should have notified the synagogue.
And therefore, the penalty on her is to be denied access to the synagogue as well.
Does it stay strictly at the synagogue?
As opposed to
schools?
Well, we're just dealing with the synagogue. What the public school system might do is beyond the question here. That's for the courts to decide, right? The courts but here we're just very specifically and narrowly talking about the synagogue. And then you have the issue that the mother of the victim is, of course, upset with the mother of the perpetrator. Okay. We sympathize with those who say, yes, Okay. So they're saying we sympathize with those who say she should be denied access. The mother's failure to notify the synagogue, however she attempts to explain it or justify it, is inexcusable. Unlike the son, she is an adult. We hold her fully culpable for the shocking lapse of moral responsibility. Yet, we think that it would be inappropriate for the congregation to deny her access. They're going to say that she should be able to go to the synagogue. Look at this. First, she poses no threat to the safety of the congregants, i.e., unlike the son, who is a convicted sexual offender, she is not. Second, she too, excuse me, must do teshuvah, and she must do it in the synagogue, the very place where she committed her transgression. So they're putting conditions. They're saying, okay, we'll let her in, but we have conditions. And what are the conditions? She must ask the forgiveness of those against whom she has sinned, her son's victim, the victim's family, and for that matter, the entire congregation. We recognize, as our She'ela emphasizes, that to allow her to return to the congregation will lead to tension, yes, and to personal distress, particularly the victim's mother. Yet this is no argument in favor of banishment. On the contrary, the victim's mother bears her own responsibility in this process of teshuvah. It is her duty and the duty of the congregation as a whole to accept the repentance of the perpetrator's mother if and when she offers it fully and sincerely. That task will be difficult, but is what our tradition requires. So here they're going opposite of what some of you said. So what do you think? What do you think of the strengths and weaknesses of their argument? Comment on they're saying she should do teshuvah publicly to the parties who have been injured and to the congregation as a whole, and therefore should not be banished from the synagogue. Obviously, we have some people who disagree with that. Any other comments on that? Yeah, Tammy.
She knew her son had problems, and she allowed him to put an application into a second camp and put himself in a compromising situation. So I can't see that she's standing on the bima in front of the whole congregation and asking for forgiveness is a way to forgive her. It's like the parents of the person who killed people in the Midwest. They now convicted the parents because they allowed their son to have a gun.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you feel that she should still be banished from the synagogue. What she has done is such a negative, such an action that the consequences should be banishment from the synagogue.
There should be a way for her to pay for it, but I don't know, standing in front of the synagogue is the way to pay for it. I don't mean in money, I mean in some kind of obligation, service or whatever.
Okay. Any other comment? Now, what's interesting here is that this teshuvah has a partial dissent, right? We have seen in other cases of Jewish law that there have been disagreements. Here, they actually published the dissent. One member of the committee, though agreeing with the broad trend of this decision, believed that the congregation should be encouraged to find appropriate means of allowing those who committed sexual offenses to participate in synagogue life. Here, he's arguing that the perpetrator should not be totally banished. To this end, we could benefit from the experience of a number of Christian churches that have developed protocols stipulating the precise conditions under which a sex offender might be allowed entry and participation in the community. We'll take a look at one of those. Actually, I found one of those, and it's an interesting document to see how some churches deal with almost the exact same type of situation. We'll get to. So he is saying we should look at them. These may include restrictive access to the synagogue building and grounds, a requirement that while on synagogue grounds, the offender be accompanied at all times by a family member or by an individual designated by the synagogue, a prohibition of access to the school and nursery areas of the synagogue facility, and so on. The synagogue might require that the offender and if he or she is a minor, the offender's family sign an agreement expressly accepting these restrictions, and it might require them to report from time to time to an appropriate committee concerning their adherence to these guidelines. In addition, the synagogue might require the perpetrator to make a statement acknowledging the pain he or she has caused the victim. Such an open acknowledgement of responsibility, called a vidui, for a confession, is perfectly consistent with our tradition's conception of repentance. Taking these or similar measures will allow us to reach out in love and concern to one of the most marginalized, frankly, one of the most despised segments of our Jewish population. This member agrees, however, that should these protocols prove impractical to administer and enforce, or should they fail to reassure the congregation that they and their children are truly safe while at the synagogue, the congregation is entitled to deny access to the perpetrator on the grounds that its overriding duty is to make the synagogue a safe place for all who make up its community. So I have two questions on this. Question one, of course, is why did they even publish the dissenting opinion? And do you think the dissenting opinion has valid points to it? Okay. What do you think of this dissenting opinion? Yeah, Carol?
To me, what gets confusing here for me is that in this case, the victim is a member of this synagogue also.
That's correct.
To me, to allow the perpetrator to stay in the same synagogue, even though he does teshuvah, is absolutely not acceptable to me.
Okay, even with all the restrictions that they have suggested.
The victim to have to see him every Shabbos is not acceptable to me.
Okay. That's what the majority, that's the majority opinion of this teshuvah. Okay.
It may sound like it's coming from left field, but I wonder the sincerity of the perpetrator in making statements. How do we know that he's speaking with any degree of sincerity? Why believe him?
It's a good question. Again, on the one hand, as we talked, Maimonides say, oh, they should be in the same situation and not do the sin. On the other hand, the psychological literature suggests that these types of disorders are often lifelong and need constant treatment and oversight. And without constant treatment and oversight, one cannot be certain, as you point out, whether or not as sincere as the confession would be, as we know with any addictive behavior, there are questions about the sincerity. Yeah. Any other comments on this so far? Yeah, Charlie again.
Well, you talk about the Christian concept. I think there's more of an acceptance of the sinner back in the fold. In other words, there's more of an open door, I think, in the Christian world. I'm not an expert on it, certainly, but it seems to be, from what I've seen, they're more open to bringing people back in regardless of what the infraction was. Whereas Judaism is much stricter generally about bringing people back in.
We'll take a look at some examples. Jack, you have your hand up. You're muted, Jack. You have to unmute for us to hear you. Can you do that? I see that you've got your hand up, but I also see that you're muted. I don't know. I don't know if I can ask to unmute.
Only ask to unmute. You can't actually unmute.
I can't actually, Jack, I can't actually unmute you. So unless you can figure out on your computer how to unmute yourself, typically, if you put your cursor on that little microphone, right? Ed, you're the expert. If he puts his cursor on the microphone, he'll get
right.
Correct. So if you can get your cursor on the microphone, if not, I'm sorry, but it's not we're not gonna be able to hear you. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. This teshuvah talks about ways in which the oh wait, let me stop the share. Okay, and we're going to share again. So for example, let's find something. Here we go. Okay. I went on the internet where else. I found actually a policy from a church. Now, I have to tell you, I don't know what the Summit Church is, but given what I know about the Christian world, I assume the Summit Church is one of these large, not quote, non-denominational, but in point of fact, fairly religiously conservative mega churches that have branches all over the country. They notice they call themselves the Summit Church. Some of them call themselves Crossroads, the Home Church. They make a point of not putting a denominational name in because they don't want to be because people don't like denominations nowadays. And we have a lot of big churches all around like that. Like people like to say, how about that one up on Route 4? 201, right? And there is a fairly large church on Route 201, which some of you may pass if you go north.
208.
The
the highway.
208.
208, sorry, 208. Thank you for correcting me. 208, and you all say it's a huge church, and my response, of course, is, yeah, I've been in the South. It's not so big. Okay, so here's an interesting question. So how does this large Christian church do this, So they have an attendance agreement. It's interesting what the reform movement's Teshuvah said. He says he looked at some church things. He may have looked at this very document, or there could be other ones. But notice the agreements have to be signed. I will be assigned a shepherding elder who will oversee my care. I will cooperate with all expectations from legal. I will get approval from my parole officer. I will not attend any service without my shepherding elder or approved individual. Remember, the reform movement dissent said the churches, and here's an example of it, says, okay, they have to be accompanied, right? Right? If my shepherding elder or an approved individual is not available, I will not attend. When I arrive, I will sign in, right? I acknowledge that all children in student areas are off limits. I will not attend a small group. I will not go to any place where there's children. I will not have any physical contact with a child. I will stay within casual conversation. In other words, here's what that dissenting opinion was talking about. And then they have to be signed, shepherding elder, and so on. Do you think it's enough?
In the perfect world, it's wonderful, but we don't have a perfect world. It's like, let's have a congregation where people who have issues can be together and can enjoy the beauty of our religion. But do we have this perfect world,
Well,
where we could put them
right.
in this environment?
Well, the question is, it's a signed agreement. If perfectly enforced and enforceable, one could argue this might be reasonable. I think, Tammy, you're questioning, which is what I do, is how purely enforceable is this?
Correct.
That
Because it's not a perfect world.
That's a good question. But notice, and I think the fact is that if we actually go to the top of this, policy regarding the attendance or membership of individuals under registered sex offender status, right? This is, by the way, this is a real issue, right? There are a lot of registered sex offenders out there who might want to come to a church.
And they want to be ministered, which they deserve to be ministered, but should they be ministered in a big group or in a small group?
Right. And this one, interestingly enough, is really consistent with that dissent that we saw in that reform teshuvah. Let them back in, but there is a clear limitation, to see to it that there is no danger. And the question is, and he saw all the specific requirements. I don't know. Would you feel safe if this was a policy of the Congregation B'nai Shalom Fair Lawn Jewish Center? Tammy is. I think you're shaking your head, Tammy.
No.
Anyone else? I'm sorry, Tammy. You want to go ahead, please?
Now, as I said, in the perfect world, it would be wonderful, but in the imperfect world, scary.
Anyone else want to comment? If you remember the Board of Trustees of the Congregation B'nai Shalom, Fairlawn Jewish Center, and this policy was placed before you to be put in place, would you vote for it or against it?
The one thing I don't see in this is monitoring on a regular basis the
Okay.
person's behavior.
Yeah, okay, so you want to be sure that the person is under supervision outside the church in some way, shape, or form.
Some way, shape, or form on a steady basis.
Right. I'll be honest. With each person in your rehabilitative care or legal accountability team to speak with us about your progress. I have to admit, I did not read this in great detail, but I think they're assuming that there is, again, that's a question. Is there continuing counseling? Are they going to meetings? Are they meeting with their parole officer? And how is that information transmitted to the congregation to be certain that the person is doing that? If the person is not doing that, does that set off alarms immediately so that the congregation is aware of what's going on, right? How good is our systems to do that? That's a good question. Okay. I see, Jackie, we've got your video, but we still don't have your audio. Okay. I see you have someone trying to help you and hopefully be able to unmute your microphone. Okay, so that's the question. Carol, what would you do on the board?
Under civil law, a previous sex offender is allowed out with freedom, but the neighborhood, people are notified that there is a sex offender living here.
Correct.
That's as far as civil law goes. If in this situation, if the victim was not in the same synagogue, I might allow him to be a member if he was always
The signal is breaking up a little bit, Carol.
accompanied by someone. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go. Yeah, please.
Okay. So if the victim was not in the same synagogue and the perpetrator was always accompanied by someone else, I think I would feel comfortable if he was allowed into the synagogue under certain specific places.
Okay, so you
Just
would agree with
say-
right. You would agree with the dissent from the teshuva of the Reform movement, and this is an example of the sorts of things that would have to be in place in order to let such a person in. And I don't know for sure which church policy the dissenting person read. My guess is that this is I hate to say this, boilerplate policy among many groups, and it's good policy. And the question is whether or not we would trust that in the congregation. As you said, if this is the congregation that the person wants to go to, where the victim is, that is a strong factor. Is it the place where the victim and the victim's family still worship? That might cause one to say, we are not so comfortable here. Okay. Anyone else?
I would think that this is a good policy, except for the fact that is it going to continue? It may start out adhering to all these restrictions, but over time, it may start to lapse a little. And I think that the perpetrator being in the synagogue with the victim, I think it would make the congregation and, of course, the victim's family feel very uncomfortable.
Okay, fair enough. Similar to what Carol was saying. Charlie, yes.
I'm going to make a generalization. I'm going to say that this church and probably many others have a fairly, I shouldn't say significant, but they have a certain amount of their population that have been formally incarcerated for some kind of crime. And they can't exclude those people. It's too large a number, and it's too more important to them to have them back in the fold, and therefore they're a little looser on this than a typical Jewish institution.
Well,
We would
so
have
you're saying this
probably
is
a much lesser percent that have been formerly incarcerated for whatever crime.
well, is that a good or a bad thing? That
Yeah.
a religious institution
No,
is
I think it's a
welcoming-
bad thing. I think it's a bad thing for us. It may be a good thing for them.
Kind of insulting, Charlie.
I
Yeah.
know, but that's,
Yeah, I mean,
they need it more than we do.
well, I
We
mean,
do
what-
not
Well,
have,
know
we do
that.
not have that is generally an issue. We have an isolated case of somebody who committed a heinous crime and the mother was complicit. They should be excluded. It's pretty black and white to me.
but does,
But
but does that,
if you were formerly in jail for a drug offense, for you did a year in jail for a drug offense, maybe you have to be a little bit more considerate about the situation.
but Charlie, does it depend upon the number of offenders who are trying to worship or the seriousness of the offense?
Both.
Both. So if there are fewer offenders, we might be more liberal.
Well, I'm talking about sexual crime versus a general crime. That's the sexual crime is particularly heinous, and maybe if it was a white collar crime, it would be a different story. I would be much more accepting if it was a white collar crime than a sexual crime. So
Only
it
would you
depends on the
restrict
type of it depends on what happened, the type of issue.
Yeah,
The
would you
sexual
restrict-
offense is higher, a much higher degree or of criminality to me than a drug
Well,
offense.
But you don't know if the white collar criminal might convince people in the congregation to invest their money with him, or be in a position where he or she might have access to congregational funds. I mean, there are issues there as well. I mean, let's not pretend this doesn't happen.
I'm
There
not
was
pretending. I'm just saying that
it- there
it's a matter of the Jewish population generally is more law-abiding than most other populations. That's statistical.
right, but we do have, for example, I can think of in my own experience in congregations I have served, a person who was sent to jail for sexually abusing his daughter. And he, by the way, was a police officer. I'm not sure when he's getting out, but at some point he's going to get out.
Yeah.
You know, I can think of people who've embezzled money who have gone to jail for such things. I can even think of a guy who murdered his wife. And in
A
a
rabbi who murdered his wife too.
yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah, so-
those are the anomalies. I mean,
What about
generally-
Madoff? What about Madoff?
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. We have crime. We certainly do. But we don't have, I mean, just percentage wise, who's in jail now? Who's in
I
jail?
understand what you're saying, but so the question is it because as I'm asking the numbers, or is it because of the seriousness?
The
and-
seriousness. I mean, the
seriousness.
sexual, and the mother was complicit in this.
Right.
So she was
Clearly.
an accomplice to the crime.
Right, so on a serious
I mean,
crime.
we're
you
talking
say
about
exclude.
sexual deviance and crime versus general crime. I mean, general crime is what you've got to be a little bit more acceptable, perhaps. If it's a white collar, to me, white
I
collar.
mean, I could argue against that. I mean,
Yeah, I'm sure you could, but
you know, the guy who steals millions through a fraudulent stock scheme, I think
Yeah.
should be sent away for a long time.
well,
but-
one of them be reformed, and there was it's still around. The one that back in the day, I forget the.
Right. I mean, we wouldn't let Jeffrey Epstein back into our synagogue.
Well, I'm not Jeffrey Epstein. I'm talking about prior to that. We had a white collar criminal who served some time, and he came back, and he's involved in cancer research and all kinds of
Okay,
good
so that can
things.
happen. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So we seem to have some difference with this position. I want to take a look at the two. Here we go. And I have to stop. You literally have to stop. I did. Okay. I think I have to stop and start all over again to get a new one up. Here we go. There we go. This is from the Rabbinical Council of America. This is the Orthodox Organization of Synagogues. They have a very long document about harassment and bullying, having to do with both staff and members of congregations. And this is synagogue access for sex offenders. That's what we're talking about, right? The primary responsibility of a congregation is to ensure the physical and emotional safety and well-being of its members, including the victims and survivors of sexual abuse by the immediate perpetrator, potential victims, minors and their parents, and the victims and survivors of other instances of sexual abuse. They don't start with a paragraph about teshuvah, as the Reform rabbis did. This goes right to that second paragraph that they had about protection. One of the most difficult challenges for congregations in dealing with abuses is that of granting access to the synagogue to a registered sex offender, that's what we're talking about here, to those even suspected of abuse, and to those charged with abuse but not convicted, right? We even have 3 different categories that they're talking about. So what's the answer? A person convicted or under suspicion of sexual abuse shall not be allowed access to the synagogue. This is the Orthodox movement speaking. This information will be shared with other synagogues in the community. Whoa, 2 very striking statements. They can't come in, and you got to tell everybody else, right? And this is orthodoxy. If desired, a private minyan which is not held in the synagogue and which is attended exclusively by adults may be organized. Oh, it's my mother's yard site, what am I supposed to do? Likewise, an abuser may be permitted to attend a synagogue, notice it says may be permitted to attend a synagogue in which no minors are present. Of course, the weakness in that statement is you think abusers only abuse minors? Come on. I mean, they're trying to be nice there, right? But I have to say, I read that and I said, is there a stereotypical view here that abusers only abuse minors? No, sorry. Eddie, you have a comment?
No, just a question. When they say they'll inform all the other synagogues, is that just the Orthodox synagogues or the conservative and Reform also?
All I can say is I don't have the Rashi. In other words, I don't have the commentary on this statement. It seems clear. It says other synagogues. It does not say other Orthodox synagogues. It does not say those within a 5-mile radius. It doesn't say those within the same state. There's a very general statement there, but it is a very clear statement. As we were discussing this question, should it be shared? And they're saying you bet, you bet. Although will be shared. It doesn't say, well, if you like to. It's a very clear, definitive, positive statement of sharing. Okay, we have some questions. Judith and then Gary.
Rabbi, I don't know if you can extrapolate, but there was a circumstance that there was a gentleman from, and I use the term loosely, from the Orthodox community who would not give his wife a get. And the Beit Din had ordered him, and he absolutely categorically refused. And there were other circumstances, I think, that might have been complicated, but it was in the Jewish Standard, and it was I know it was on Teaneck Shuls. That's how I learned about it. He was being shunned, and and the other congregations were told not to allow him permission to daven in any of the shuls. So I don't know if it's going to apply to a sex offender, but it did to, and there's a specific term, I can't remember what it is, for a man who doesn't give a get to the former wife. But he fell into that category, and the fact that he continually refused at the behest of all these different organizations that went to him, he was shunned, and it was publicly noted.
Okay, just to be clear, Judith is talking about a man he will not allow his wife to have a Jewish divorce, which means that she forever cannot get married again in a Jewish ceremony. I would argue, and I think it should be clear, if you're going to say this about someone who doesn't give someone a get, how much more so you should say something about someone who is a sexual abuser, right? Alachat kama v'chama, as they say in they use the term in the Talmud, even more so in the more, if you're doing it in the lenient, in the, the guy who walks into the synagogue is not going to physically hurt anybody, but he is causing great damage to his wife or former wife. How much more so would you say that type of publicity about not allowing a person in would apply to a sexual offender, right? That would be an assumption I would assume to be some, although it's a good question. I don't know. I can't think of examples of that. I don't know.
There was
Yeah.
a case,
Sorry.
there was a case and it was in the news. There was a
Oh,
Jewish,
yes.
there
Yeah,
was a
in
Jewish,
Brooklyn. Yeah.
he was at a restaurant or something and he was sexually abusing the staff.
That was yes, that was in Teaneck. Yes.
Yeah.
He sold the restaurant. I don't know where that stands legally, but it was on was it Cedar Lane? It was right by West Englewood.
They made that very public, and whether,
Yes.
and there was a whole bunch of shunning going on
Yeah.
there too.
Right, to the point here, he sold his business. My understanding is that he's no longer in business there. I do not know where unfortunately, these legal cases can take a very long time to be settled, so I'm not sure where that went. Gary, you had your hand up? You're muted, we can't hear you. Gary? Figure out.
Yes,
Okay.
I just wanted to delineate between a person who is convicted and one who is under suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
And that paragraph or that phrase bothers me a little bit. I'm trying to, come to terms with it.
Well, what they're clearly doing is they're being very strict
Yes.
in order to be protective. A person under suspicion, you're right, is not anybody under in America. You're not guilty until you've been proven so. You're assumption
Right.
of innocence. So what they're saying is that in this case, we are going to be very strict about it. And if a person is now I don't know what under suspicion means. Does that mean that legal action has been taken? Does that mean that people have said things? That's also a good question as to exactly what that means. But I think what they're being very strict about, which I think is to their praise, is that they're saying, yeah, we are very strict about protecting people. Yeah. Okay, Charlie? Yeah.
I think, to Gary's point, I think there needs to be something said about due process. I
Mhm.
mean, under suspicion, people suspect things, unfortunately, that are not true very often. And they come to erroneous conclusions based on what they see, but what you see is not always what you get, so to speak. And we need due process for everybody, whether they're sex offenders or anybody else.
Oh,
There
I
must
agree
be
with
due process.
there must be due process, but what do you do with someone who has been charged with
A charge is different. You always saying under suspicion, as Gary said, it's too nebulous. It's not
maybe so.
specific enough.
Maybe so, but the idea that one should be, shall we say, strict about protecting the welfare of the congregants,
We should
you're
be
right.
strict, but we have to be fair. We have to be strict
Okay.
and fair in what we do.
Right, so a congregation could make a decision as to at what point and at what level those sorts of things might be in place.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go now to another one. I don't know if I can stop the share. And I gotta share the share. 1 second. Okay, no, I don't know if I had to do that. Maybe I didn't. I know, Ed, you're an expert. So if I'm sharing, can I just go to another? Here we go. No, not that one. Oh, I know what I need to do. Sorry. Give me a moment here. Share the screen.
I'm not an expert in sharing. I don't share.
You don't share? When you were in kindergarten, did you not share?
Exactly.
Oh
Never.
my. Okay. Here, I want to, there are two things on this. Okay. The Rabbinical Assembly recently, as in like just a couple of weeks ago, after a long period of study, hiring outside experts, going over in detail, came up with a professional code, a code of professional conduct having to do with sexual harassment and other issues of ethics for synagogues and rabbis. And actually, there was a long debate. They basically said we need everybody in every conservative rabbi to proactively say, I've read this and I see it and I agree with it. Although some people said, well, if you're a member of the RA, Rabbinical Assembly, you automatically agree with it. Be that as it may, this was the result of a long process. I'm sure we are all aware, more than aware, that sexual abuse by clergy people is not an unknown topic, and it's not just the Catholic Church. All three major movements in Judaism have had, and I hate to say this, major scandals where major rabbinic figures have been accused of sexual abuse. Some of these have come up many, many years, even after the abuser has passed away. I'm not going to name names, but I will just point out that some of these were very, very, very prominent within their movement. And so, the RA came up with this policy. Some would say that they're about 50 years too late, but okay, you're right that it took a long time. There are two things I wanted to point out too. Okay, this one. Standards regarding child sexual abusers. Okay, an RA member must not knowingly allow anyone, whether a minor or adult, who has been convicted, here we go, this is question, right? Convicted, okay, or is under active investigation, that's the suspicion, for a sex crime against a child, into their synagogue or organization if there are any children who may be present. Notice there's some qualifiers there. We'll go back to that. In cases where RA members are not in the decision-making position within their organizations, the rabbi must reach out to the RA to report steps they have taken. In other words, what if the Board of Trustees says to the rabbi, sorry, you can't bar entry to the building to this person. We're not allowing you to do that. There are some, shall we say, gray areas of authority within synagogues. That's almost always the case in nonprofits that have boards of trustees and professionals who work there, and contracts may or may not spell out in detail exactly who gets to decide what. And sometimes there are differences of opinion, and sometimes it's the board, and sometimes it's the rabbi, and sometimes they work together. And need I tell you, that's what happens. But let's take a look at this policy and see what we think about it. A conservative rabbi, member of the Rabbinical Assembly, must not knowingly allow anyone who has been convicted or is under active investigation. So here's that first question, right, Charlie? You had that question. So how do we know for sure this person is someone we don't want in? Two possibilities. Convicted is obvious. Now they are saying under active investigation, okay? They haven't been convicted yet, but they're under active investigation. So there they are going to be more strict, shall we say, for a sex crime against a child into their synagogue or organization. In that case we had from the Reform movement, total agreement. The kid doesn't come in, right? The perpetrator is out. But notice there are some qualifications. If there are any children who may be present, I have to say I find that weakening a bit too much, but maybe that's me. In cases where RA members are not in decision-making position, hey, I don't want that. Hey, I don't want, so-and-so in the synagogue. But the board says, what do you mean? So-and-so is a fine, upstanding person. But the rabbi says, no, he's being investigated for sex crimes. No, the board says, we know. So the rabbi may be overruled. So notice, this is a clear, what we call this, watch your, right? In other words, we tell the rabbi, okay, hey, look, I tried to keep this guy out. The synagogue said, okay, I'm calling the rabbinical assembly. So I want the rabbinical assembly to know that if anything happens, I'm not culpable. I did my duty. Okay. So what do you think of this policy? Comments? Good policy, bad policy, needs to be refined, good as it stands. Any comments on this one? Carol?
I don't like it because you can't predict when a child would be present. Someone at a meeting might suddenly bring in a grandchild. So it weakens the decision here. And
Okay.
I find that.
By the way, this is something that I personally can mention to the Rabbinical Assembly. I'm a member, and there has been discussion about this. Section 8. Doesn't Section 8 mean something else in the military or something? Isn't Section 8
Section 8 in real estate
Real
means you have
estate.
to allow somebody with federal funds to come into your rental.
Okay, I knew I
Right.
Section 8.
No, in the military, it's a,
22,
it's a,
Section
it's a
8.
kind of discharge.
So
It's
you
a
can-
psychological discharge, I think.
Mental discharge.
Mental discharge from the, okay. Well, this is Section 8 for the R for conservative rabbis.
So the rabbi must be a whistleblower.
Right, that's what they're saying. Yes, the rabbi must be a whistleblower, but we're questioning whether this issue as to a child may be present is strong enough. And that, that we feel that might weaken the intent of this, okay? But what about the other part? Convicted or under investigation? Do we like that?
What's the definition of a child?
I guess anyone under 18. Minor. That's the question. Does sexual abusers, ask for ID? Does making that, is that? I mean, I don't know the legal issues there, but I'm just questioning that. What about we questioned the legal issues in that other policy, which talked about was stricter than this one, right? This one talks about active investigation, which is a stronger term than, quote, suspicion, right? So this is in a sense more restrictive in terms of who you might exclude from your community. Do we like that? Not like that? What do you think?
I don't think that the child, I mean, they should not be allowed in. I mean, you can have an adult with a mentality of a child. Where does that lead?
We do have, by the way, on Shabbat morning at the Congregation B'nai Shalom Fairlawn Jewish Center, we very often have individuals who are by age past the age of majority, but mentally are in a different place, right? We actually have several people, and we're very happy that they're there, right? Those of you who go to services regularly on Shabbat morning know that, right? It's an interesting question. I'll ask the RA about that. I'll let you know.
It also doesn't say what will happen when you make your report. What is the enforcement?
I think
are they going to come in and close down the shul?
No. They're going to say it was reported by the rabbi of this congregation about this individual. The congregation refused to take the rabbi's advice. Then if later on there is a legal case, the rabbi can say, look, I tried to stop this guy from going into the synagogue, but I was overruled. And I have official documentation that I did not enable this abuse to occur. So
it's strictly for the cover. It's not really for.
Absolutely. It's strictly for cover. You're absolutely correct, because the National RA can't decide who comes in, who walks into your synagogue, but they do want to protect rabbis who, and this is not an impossible situation. Let's face it. I mean, this is something where, again, as I said, there are some gray areas of authority. Okay. And notice the second part of it. We just have a couple of minutes. In cases where such a person is permitted entry by the synagogue or organization, and the rabbi has strongly recommended the code standard but has been overruled, the rabbi must reach out to the RA to report, and they attempted to implement the RA standard but did not have the RA authority. So they're even being more specific. You know, you got to say, I tried and I failed. Right? Interestingly enough, one other point, if we have time, here. It is strongly recommended that RA members withhold communal honors from those who have been convicted of crimes that have significantly impacted others, such as crimes that may have led to the financial ruin of others. It is recommended that if someone is under active investigation for any of the above crimes, RA members should withhold communal honors from an individual in any public setting. Okay. In other words, now we're talking about a whole other issue of ethics where, you know, Charlie, and they're asked, you know, we talked about, so now I have a white collar criminal. Does he get an aliyah?
I know that to me,
Charlie?
that's a major issue. I
Hey,
mean,
you're-
it's not an issue I face, but it should be separate. I mean, getting an honor should be separate from anything else. It should be just because you're there or whatever. It should not be based on other factors.
Another conviction.
Criminality may be a factor. I don't know.
You don't know. Hey, Charlie, you're giving out the honors.
I know.
Excuse me, could you show me your criminal record, please, before I ask you about Gucci? You know, you're not going to do that.
I don't
But,
think it's a problem for us, but
you don't think it's a problem for us, but it's an interesting question too. Notice we're going, and this is again what you brought up, that important question. You know, what sort of criminal activity is it that we consider to be causing people to be excluded? Okay, Tammy, you have a
Yeah,
comment?
well, you know, we don't want to give Michael Manoff an aliyah, but on the other hand, Michael Milken was accused of something that is really gray, and he has been very philanthropic, giving a lot of money to a lot of Jewish associations. But, you know, his crime was different from Manoff, who really took everybody's money.
Right. It wasn't a
So-
Ponzi. It wasn't a
No.
Ponzi scheme. That was right from the beginning a clearly illegal operation. Yeah.
So there are gray areas too, but
There might be gray
something.
areas, yes.
But
Carol?
wasn't his name taken off the building at JTS?
no, that was not.
yeah.
That was not him. It was another guy at the
It
same
was,
time.
The same
It was-
name.
There was Boski also.
Boski. Well,
Boski's
yeah.
name was
Boski's
taken off.
name was taken.
Was taken off. Yes, yes. I mean, that's that's another issue. But since we were on this code, I thought I'd just mention it. Okay. Final comments or questions before we conclude our I'm going right from this session to another Zoom session with Pamela Barmash, the author of Modern Responsa, who wrote the book that we're using as our guideline nowadays. So I'm interested to see what she has to say, and I'll report back that we're studying her book, but I'm also adding some additional materials. Maybe I can talk to her about having a supplement with some of these. I mean, I think it's interesting to see exactly what the policies are of the church and the Orthodox movement and the Rabbinical Assembly in this question of the sexual abuser at the synagogue. Okay, any other comments before we leave today?
No, other than hi, Gary, good to see you.
Yeah, Gary, good to see you.
Thank you.
You all come back.
Welcome back.
Sooner or
Very
later.
interesting,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you. Yasher koach.
Oh, I see Brenda's there too. Good to see you.
Hello, my dear Judith.
Hello
Okay.
there.
Good to see everyone. Everyone have a good day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Indeed.
Thank